Welcome, thanks for coming. It's a great pleasure to be here tonight and share with you some of the really cool things that we're doing at Argonne with respect to translating discovery science out into the real world. Okay, but anyway, my name is John Carlisle. I'm the Director of Chain Reaction Innovations. And the central theme tonight is about moving high-impact science into high-impact products. That's really the parent theme. What you'll learn is that Chain Reaction Innovations, essentially the simple version is we place young entrepreneurs, startup companies, if you will, in Argonne, and they spend a couple of years de-risking their technology and moving out of our market. The story is a lot more complex than that. There's a lot of moving parts, a lot of dimensions that have to do with what's changing in the energy landscape, what happens to scientists when they get bitten by the business bug, if you will, and want to translate their innovations into market. And just this whole famous problem of the valley of death for hard tech startups. It just takes a lot of capital in order to translate them. Can Argonne help with that? So I'm going to try to weave together all these themes into hopefully a coherent story this evening and try to give you a sense of not only what we're doing to help startups, but there's a larger picture here that I hope to paint for you that's quite new and quite disruptive and a lot of fun. Anyway. First part is to talk about the easy part, which is basic research. Basic research is hard, but it's actually, as far as this story, it's the easy part. Now, first of all, how many people have never been to Argonne before? Well, there's quite a few hands there, that's good. How many people, if you ask what Argonne is, what it does, you're completely comfortable to expound at length for hours about everything that Argonne does? Not me. Okay, so I'll start with the Argonne story because there are some people who've just never been here. They don't know what Argonne is, right? So if you're at a cocktail party and you need to give a quick answer, this is what I suggest you say. So Argonne is about energy-inspired basic research. So basically it's an engine, it takes about $1 billion in resources, and its output, generally speaking, you would describe as basic research outcomes. Basic research is not product development, it's not the business stuff. Basic research is knowledge for the sake of knowledge. When you do experiments, like at the Advanced Photon Source that we're just next to, the experiments you do, the thought processes you go through, they're all guided by answering fundamental questions about the universe and what makes it tick. The energy-inspired part is a little bit of context to what the national labs do in particular. So even though it's basic research, there's some relevancy to energy that's going on. So materials that might be low friction, and that would save energy in mechanical devices, just as one example. So Argonne's about mainly doing basic research. That's its primary mission. It also has a mission to drive impact into the real world. Generally speaking, when you talk about impact, it goes across the board. Publishing papers is impact, of course. Working with industry like pharmaceutical companies work at APS to do drug discovery. That's another example of impact. We're talking tonight about high-impact science moving into high-impact products. That's a rapid process in the relative sense of the word. Argonne's really stood up originally over half a century ago to do basic research and have the long perspective, to have a 100-year perspective almost on what's relevant to energy. In contrast, what we're talking about tonight is, I made a discovery in a lab, I'd really like to see it go out into the market and be productized. That's not a comfort zone for the national labs, and for that matter, universities in general, Argonne's very much like a university. Basic research institutions, the more you get into startup mode and trying to build business value rapidly and quickly, the less comfort and the less the organization is geared towards doing that. Now, the interesting thing is Argonne's got a lot of interesting resources if you're an entrepreneur trying to translate tech to market. Part of what CRI does is tap into Argonne in order to accelerate that process. Now, another thing going on here is what you might call the ROI basic research, the return on investment. So in the context of what I just said, it's interesting to put a perspective on just how hard, how difficult it is to move innovations into market. A lot of different ways to do this. Here are 3 numbers that I picked. First of all, $86 billion in the United States spent on basic research every year. It's about 1/6 of the $500 billion that we spend on R&D in general, okay? big number. Actually, compared to most countries, that's a small number compared to per capita or GDP. So nonetheless, it's a big number. Your expectation, that's, by the way, all of us, we're paying that bill. What's the return on investment? Basic research, most scientists think about publications as sort of their fundamental unit of value creation. They do experiments, they communicate the results. It's what we all learn in high school, the scientific process, right? So we produce about 341,000 publications every year in the United States that are more or less reflective of basic research results. Now, here's a question for you. How many successful startups are there per year? And by success, I'm defining this, is they actually make something and they ship it to somebody and they buy it. And it's a sustainable business. So I'm not talking about startups that have great PowerPoints or win Shark Tanks and all that stuff. I mean, real businesses. How many? This is the point where I tell you, I was a former professor and I really insisted on active learning. Okay, how many? Come on, it's not snowing yet, you're alive. Huh? 200. I got a 200. Did I get a 400? Huh? 5? You said 5? 7? 5. That's actually pretty good. That's actually pretty good. It's real, 10 to the 10? No, it's just tens. Tens, not 10 to the 10, no Googleplexes, sorry, we're not in that mode. It's really hard. And in fact, just trying to look up the statistic, I couldn't really find an answer. This is partly a guess on my part, but as you'll learn in a moment, I'm an entrepreneur in this space. I see a lot of companies trying to do this. Let me tell you, it's really tough to do this. Moving innovation to market is hard to do intrinsically. It's never going to be easy. Part of what we're trying to do is make it easier. What's interesting is the changes in the energy landscape are making this even more interesting. So the second section is the new energy crisis, or I'll call it that. So first of all, let's talk about the old energy crisis. Now I'm 55. You know, I grew up in the 70s, rural Texas. In rural Texas in the 70s, if you didn't have a car, you didn't have a social existence in high school. I had a Buick GS 455, stage 1, a V8. It got about 5 miles per gallon-ish. And at the time, I remember going to 7-Eleven, and gas was $1.47 a gallon, which is $4.20 in today's dollars, actually. And that would get me around the strip between the Sonic and the McDonald's like twice, and then I had to park the car. So the energy crisis really impacted me on a personal level deeply when I was in high school. Look, that was the Saudi oil embargo. That's why the Department of Energy was stood up in the first place. Remember, energy-inspired basic research, that's what Argonne does. Okay, you could talk at length about what it means for the old energy crisis, but it really nets down to the following things. Oil's a finite resource. We're going to run out of it at some point. And as you can see on this graph, at some point you're going to have peak oil, which is this maximum production point in time. And then there's just simply not enough oil to get, or it's too difficult to get. And no matter what you do, the supply is going to drop off. There are at least as many versions of this peak oil chart as there are hits you'll get on Google if you Google search peak oil. I mean, there's just a lot of different ones, right? And this all started in the 60s. This is a chart that I pulled from the late 90s when gas spiked at that time. And in 2010, they were predicting peak oil. And there were a lot of really serious predictions that we were going to have $20 a gallon gas in 2010. If you went to Tesla's website a few years ago, I still remember this because I was trying to convince my wife to buy a Tesla. It didn't happen. They had a calculator there, so well, if gas goes to a predicted value of $8, here's all this money you could save buying a Tesla, right? Okay. Did this happen? No, it didn't. Here's an interesting factoid for you. For the last 100 years, the minimum price of gas and the max price of gas have gone from $2 to $3.50 a gallon on national average. It's stayed in that range, max, min. If you look at the chart, it's not going up or down, it's constant. The new reality is even more radical, okay? The energy landscape has really fundamentally changed in so many different ways. And every stakeholder that's important to us in chain reaction innovations is still grappling with the new reality. And that ranges from large corporations like Echelon to Argonne National Lab to universities to investors to the innovators that participate in our program. A lot of amazing things. So instead of running out of energy, the US is projected to be a net exporter of energy in just a few years. By the way, most of the statistics are coming from EIA, the Energy Institute of America. I don't put that in every slide, but if you want to look these up, just go to that website. There's a couple others I could recommend as well. Another thing, renewables are going to be generating 40% of the electricity that we use by 2031. So just an incredible change from the 70s perspective about energy, and now we're running out of it, and we don't really have an alternative to fossil fuels, and now suddenly there are all these returnables, and they're cheaper than traditional sources. That's the other really remarkable thing. In many places in the world, solar, wind are less than nuclear and coal and gas. If you read about coal plants being shut off, it's done purely, really, because of the raw economics. You just can't make electricity with coal and make money if you're a utility. You're deploying renewables now in many, many cases. Things have gotten so interesting that now, instead of peak oil, you start to find people talking about a new concept, peak energy. Peak energy demand. That previous chart was supply. Remember, the supply is going to run out? This is now a prediction of the world energy demand over time. And now there's a prediction that because the electrification of the grid, because of using renewables, is so much more efficient that the planet Earth will start using less energy by 2050, and maybe even sooner. This chart predicts 2030. Now, this is controversial. This you will not find on EIA's website. That website still predicts a 28% increase, same time frame. But the trends are there. The renewables are so much more energy efficient, in spite of the fact that China and India and their growing middle class are going to consume a lot more energy because of the electrification of the grid and the increasing use of renewables to use that electricity or create that electricity is just much more efficient. So the overall energy demand is now, in some cases, in models, going to either plateau or even diminish over time. We're really just on the tip of synergies here between different renewable technologies. I picked this example. I don't know if you can see this clearly. This is a lake in China. This is a dam, a reservoir. And this is solar panels over the lake. So somebody got the idea that, you dam up all this water, you got this nice big flat plain that's exposed, no trees. Why don't you put solar panels there? You use the solar panels during the day to generate electricity. The panels keep the evaporation rates low. They also keep all the boaters and all those people off the lake that they don't want. Wait a minute now, maybe that idea won't work. Anyway, the synergy is very obvious, right? During the day you use solar, and at night when the solar doesn't work, then you run the hydropower just the way you normally do. We're just on the edge of figuring out those synergies, Renewables are just now coming online. So here's the question. What does energy innovation mean now? Now I want to pause a moment because you think about what I told you about Argonne, energy-inspired basic research, $86 billion, $1 billion of it going to Argonne. What does it do? What do you mean by innovation now? If you're a business guy, what you hear is that energy is cheap, going to stay cheap, we're not going to run out of it. Well, where's the problem? So fundamentally, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're an innovator, if you make a discovery in a lab, you want to translate it to the market, all that great stuff, but you're trying to solve a problem. We're talking about high-impact problems. You need to have our high-impact technology. You need to have a high-impact problem. Somebody's got to be in real pain to take on a disruptive new technology. We're not talking about incremental improvements. We're talking about something that's a game changer, okay? This is an example of a game changer, Tesla. So now I know every other day you hear about Tesla and how great it is, and I use it too much myself. But this is an example of better, not cheaper. So most of the old paradigm, the 70s oil crisis perspective, which is still shaping a lot of our thoughts, is based on we're going to run out of oil, the price of oil is going to go up, We don't have any alternatives. We got to be cheaper, we got to be more efficient, blah, 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 blah. Well, now energy's cheap. I heard an executive from a major utility actually say the following thing. If only the consumers would use more electricity and drive the cost up, then we could pay for innovations. I don't know how many business guys are here. When you hear that, you're like, okay, yeah, that's really going to happen. Thank you very much. Well, what about all those LED lights that we started using? What about those credits? If you bought a gas furnace that was super efficient at home, they pay you back for that because, why? Because we're supposed to be running out of energy. Well, we're not anymore, supposedly. Now, where's the gotcha? Who's going to say it? Yay, thank you. We got a winner in the back. Climate change. Dun, dun, dun. The good news is we're not going to run out of fossil fuels, and it's going to be cheap, and so on and so forth, just what I said. The bad news is we're not going to run out of fossil fuels. We're going to burn them. It doesn't matter which side of the debate you're on. It's a headwind against innovation. It's unfortunate because really this is the new energy crisis, climate change. None of the models that you look up predict that the natural uptake of low carbon technologies to make energy are going to meet the Paris targets for climate, for temperature reduction by the end of the century. It doesn't happen. Even the more optimistic models, even the one I showed you where energy demand plateaus and goes down, none of those models show that. We're going to burn gas, we're going to burn coal, especially in India. That's where coal is just dirt cheap. It's really going to be hard from an economic perspective to drive the adoption of other technologies that are more expensive. So the new energy crisis is climate. And we don't have a solution for that. We need a solution. Now, let me change the subject a little bit, because another thing that you need to really do this is much more fundamental and simple. You need people. Scientists have to be empowered to move their tech to market. And this is something that's very much a personal journey for me. Basically, ever since I can remember, I was telling people I was a physicist. Not going to be a physicist. I was a physicist. This is myself in the 70s. My dad's an inorganic chemist, or was an inorganic chemist at a small university in rural Texas, West Texas A&M University. Really grew up in a lab. And yeah, I actually had this picture in my bedroom when I was that age. Okay. These were my heroes. I did have a Dallas Cowboys poster too, yes. Okay. But these were my heroes. They are all here, Einstein and Dirac and Werner Heisenberg and Niels Bohr and Marie Curie. I'm a physicist. And by the way, all the changes I've gone through life, I've been the entrepreneur, I've done all this other stuff. I've never stopped being a physicist at any moment. I'm always that persona, okay? These were my heroes. Needless to say, the value of basic research was really baked into my DNA. To make it worse, or better, my mother is an artist, so art for the sake of art, knowledge for the sake of knowledge. You know, it's literally what I grew up with. When I came to Argonne in 2000, many years later, of course, not that many, somewhat later, I had already been working with a group here at Argonne on synthetic diamond, and we're not making gemstones, we're making coatings, a technology that basically allows you to spray diamond like a paint, if you will, onto a surface. And those breakthroughs got a lot of industrial interest. And so we had people coming in asking us every imaginable question. The why of that's real simple. Diamond is nature's extreme material, but it's generally the undiscovered country of materials because it's virtually non-manufacturable. Yes, it has applications here and there, but when we made our breakthrough at Argonne, it in principle unlocked the key and made it much more manufacturable, much more economic, much easier to integrate with other materials. In listening to these companies, I really was bitten personally by the bug. I was bitten by the bug of wanting to see my innovation actually get into real products. And I started talking about that, and I started thinking about a startup. This was in 2001, 2 at Argonne. And immediately I felt like this guy. You may know this guy. I felt like I was going to the dark side. I don't want to dive too deeply into this subject, but part of what I'm trying to point out here, a difficulty of high-impact science to high-impact products, is that you need the scientists that develop the innovation to help with that process. Technologies today are way too complex, and you need to work the basic applied commercial continuum in order to de-risk and fine-tune the technology in order to get it realized into an actual application. And scientists aren't great at that. You grow up, you do basic research, you publish papers, that's your metric. When you start talking about, hey, I want to do a startup, I want to be an equity founder, you say the word profit. Profit's a bad word. Most scientists don't like the word profit. You know, that's evil stuff, you know. Making money, well, we're supposed to like wear Birkenstocks and publish papers. That's what we do. We're scientists, right? We're geeks, we're dorks, we're poor. I'm laying it on too thick. The point is a big headwind for him because I really felt like I was betraying, you know, if you will, my upbringing when it came to going into the business axis and trying to do this, okay? Well, anyway, I ignored everybody and I did my own did a startup. We called it Advanced Diamond Technologies. And it's been in Romeoville now for 13 years and we put out at least 6 or 7 different products and it's profitable. It's not huge. It's employed about 30 to 40 people every year in Romeoville doing things from industrial coatings, pump seals, to bearings, to electrochemical water treatment. It's been a blast. It's been a great ride. And I hit the eject button out of that startup company in 2016 and came back to Argonne. There's one product I want to talk about in particular, and it was one that was unsuccessful. But to me, it really epitomizes one of the outcomes we're trying to drive in chain reaction innovations. So for a time, I got to work with Robert Jarvik, Jarvik heart fame, did the first fully artificial heart transplant in the early 80s, to develop essentially a diamond bearing for a ventricular assist device. This is essentially a pump that gets installed in the wall of the ventricle, left ventricle, and it's basically a pump. It's an assist to an ailing heart. The why of this is really obvious. About 4,000 or 5,000 people are waiting for artificial hearts. Most of them will never get them. They will perish. Even more tragic are infants, neonatal applications, born with heart defects. This is meant to be a bridge, but that bridge wouldn't last long enough. We were trying to make this last longer. The function of diamond was to be wear resistant. This thing runs at 60,000 RPMs in your chest. Okay, so it's doing the job of being a wear resistant coating. This thing's rotating, this is stationary. But it also needs to be antithrombogenic, which means clot resistant. Clot's kind of bad, as you could imagine, right? And actually, for most people that get transplants in the blood-facing applications like valves and so on and so forth, you have to live on anticoagulants the rest of your life. And those drugs are bad. They're seriously harmful to your health. What's the point? The point is, over my career, I published over 200 publications. I trade them all to work on this problem. And the fact that we were able in Advanced Diamond to create an entity to go up to bat and try to solve this problem was special and wonderful. And scientists who are doing basic research, who publish papers, and who want to go and see their innovation in somebody's chest ought to be rewarded and encouraged and empowered to do so. And that's a large part, really the central part of what chain reaction innovation is trying to do. We're trying to train the next generation of energy entrepreneurs to go out and create real businesses, ship real products that have high social and economic impact. Empowering the next generation of energy entrepreneurs is really central to what this program does. Now, finally, last section, a new model to drive impact. So, just to recap, the new energy crisis needs more scientists to embrace the challenge, a better way to connect all of the stakeholders, because remember the whole energy landscape thing is turned the whole equation on its head. And we also need to find a way to bridge the valley of death, which is a fancy way of saying that it takes a whole lot of money to go from a science fiction state of a technology to science reality, if you will. That thing is Chain Reaction Innovations here at Argonne. That's the program I direct. It's only a couple of years old. It's very high risk. It's designed from the ground up to make everybody uncomfortable. Really. And my team gets to sit at the center of all that, and every day we get to go out into a different point in parameter space and solve problems and slay dragons. Let me tell you how it works. First of all, very important, this is not moving lab tech to market. This is Spinin. So we run a competition and we look for the best innovators in the United States. Young, old, black, white, men, women. They are people that have been in a lab, they've made a discovery, and like when I was working on the Jarvik heart, they've been bitten by the bug of wanting to see their innovation actually get into an application. We run a competition. We get over 100 applications. In fact, just last week we had 122 applications. We can only pick 4 or 5 because that's how much money the government gives us to run the program. Very competitive. What we do is we try to pair them up with scientists here at Argonne who have unique resources, unique capabilities that will help them accelerate their tech to market. Not just about having a cool toy in a lab, it's also about the people and what they do. Sometimes 30, 40 years of experience in the technology space that's relevant to what the innovator is doing. Then we give them all in about $1 million. $1 million. We give them $1 million. We give them $1 million. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? Anyway, give them $1 million in total resources to spend 2 years here at Argonne to do something. Salary, benefits, travel, there's $250,000 just to pay the bills to do the technical work. There's my wonderful team that helps them on a daily basis answer every question, from how do I talk to investors to what's better, Lou Malnati's or Giordano's? Lou's. Okay, take that home. Lou's best. No, sorry. The other thing that we do that's really critical and that's really wonderful about the program, it doesn't exist in isolation within the walls of Argonne. We connect with the Chicago Regional Energy Innovation System, and it is amazingly robust. Investors, you think about Exelon, you think about Schneider Electric, you think about 3Com, they're all here. They're all representing all of those key stakeholders that I talked about earlier to help them with what they're trying to do, which is they're trying to build a successful business, not just do the technology stuff. You've got to innovate on the business axis, you've got to innovate on the manufacturing axis, and you've got to innovate on the technology axis simultaneously in order to get this tech to market. What we're trying to do is get them to the point where they actually raise private money in a couple of years. Most of the time it's not going to work. It's hard. It's crazy hard. I just can't emphasize that enough. It's just crazy what we demand of these wonderful people to do, but they step up and they try to do it. We have our first cohort about to graduate, so we're really going to find out if, this is an act that has leg. Now, I really love this picture because when you talk about the value generation engine, it's really all about this relationship between the innovator, this is Ian Hamilton, and the scientists that he's working with, Sergei Chemarov, as well as several others, not just one scientist, but frequently many scientists. First of all, here's Ian. He's trying to develop a nuclear battery. He's trying to convert radioactive waste into a battery that lasts 30 years. Imagine the ever-ready battery bunny jumping around for 30 years. That's the problem he's solving. I know it's a huge problem. I know you're worried about that a lot. That's what he's doing. It's sort of hard to get a hold of radioactive waste. Kind of tough. What do? Well, it turns out that an electron gun that Sergei built cost, I don't know, 10, 20 million, it's a lot, can simulate the presence of the ionizing radiation in his device. So that's the whole point of this. This thing in the back is this $20 million thing that accelerates electrons. This is a prototype of this product, and they're working together. And Ian, of course, is getting all the obvious benefits of Sergei's experience. But the other thing going on here that's subtle, and it gets back to how the places like Argonne react to this changing energy landscape. Ian's talking to him too. It's illuminating the importance of what Sergei does here at the lab. It's shining a light to the market in a way that doesn't normally happen in a place like Argonne. Remember, Argonne's designed to take the long view, not respond to the market instantly. What would happen if the advanced photon source, if a guy came running in, Steven Streifer, the director, said, hey, gas is up to 450, we got to do something different. That doesn't make any sense, right? Long perspective. Entrepreneurs have to build business value. They have to do it rapidly. If you give somebody $1 million, the expectation is you're going to build some value. And by value, I mean business value. 5, 6, 7, 10, $20 million of business value. They have to. It's got to happen fast. Fast is not usually what this guy here, the scientist, is all about. Remember what I said? We push everybody out of their comfort zone. Everybody gets pushed out of their comfort zone. Believe me, our entrepreneurs coming in the lab's not exactly a startup place, right? Sort of an anti-startup place, the opposite of a startup, if you will. But this collaboration is the engine that drives the value generation. A lot of what we do, the team does, is nurture and monitor and help that collaboration along as they stay here for a couple of years. This is cohort 1. They've been here about 18 months. And you met Ian. He's doing the radioactive battery thing. He's actually pivoted. He's doing waste heat conversion now. So that's another thing our innovators do that really makes Argonne uncomfortable. They changed their plan. You had a statement of work, and now it's different. Well, that's what startups do. They pivot, they change, they react. Felipe here is reinventing fire. Yeah, he's putting a plasma to drive the combustion processes more to completion, more efficiency. One of the target applications is that jetliner that you're sitting on the runway for an hour. It's burning energy with those turbines going. His turbines can run at a lower RPM, and therefore United Airlines saves a lot of money. Tyler and Justin feed sugar water to fungus, and then they burn the fungus and they make a different type of activated carbon. That's what they did. That was pivot number, what are we up to? 5? 7. Thank you, Adria. 7. Somebody told them from the Booth School of Business, by the way, remember the ecosystem, the connectivity? They work with the Booth School of Business student. The Booth student said, hey, before you burn the fungus, doesn't it have a lot of protein in it? And Justin and Tyler go, oh yeah, it does. So now they're into sustainable protein. They're able to manufacture a very complete protein product using much less expensive inputs. So think about climate, think about a whole host of issues with eating animal proteins. I mean, there's just a whole bunch of things that get lit up. Sustainable protein is a really big deal. And finally, Julie and BJ here, they are teaching diesel engines how to eat ethanol, burn ethanol. This is something that the scientists at Argonne said, oh, you can't do that. And they said, yes, you can. And the scientists said, no, that won't work. And he said, yes, you can. And then they made it work. And again, that's informing maybe a whole new direction of energy-inspired basic research at Argonne because of what these two people are doing. Great story. We had our big demo day just a few weeks ago at the Gleacher Center, downtown Chicago, right next to the Apple Store. Big event, and this was really the coming out party for cohort 1 to go off and show investors and show the community, if you will, what they've been doing for 18 months, the business value that they're trying to build, make connections with private investors, so on and so forth. Our second cohort really finished onboarding. In fact, a couple of people are still going through that process. Again, they're doing all sorts of neat stuff. Erica's putting wind turbines on the top of buildings, coupling that with solar, trying to essentially enable small-scale wind with a flywheel, basically replacing expensive electronics with a flywheel technology. Chad Husko's putting laser beams on frickin' silicon wafers. I don't know what that means, but he's doing it. Light is a lot easier to push around than electrons. You think about data centers and how much energy they take. He's trying to address that problem. Ted So is working on a battery technology to enable it to work at low temperature. Tom Gar, an endowed professor at Michigan State University, he has a molecule that stores a lot of energy, so he's trying to make grid-level storage. Veronica has the world's most efficient way to burn liquid fuels and convert it to electricity in a small form factor. And so you think about drones, you think about other applications where you really need very high energy density. That's the application she's chasing. And then my favorite, David here. David is, Dyson hand dryers? So imagine a Dyson hand dryer on the back of a semi-truck, and it's in real time vectoring the flow of air across the back of that surface, reducing drag, saving about 20% of the energy, the diesel fuel ethanol. BJ and Julie are going to do the ethanol, right? Ethanol fuel, with essentially a real-time sheet of air that's directing the flow of air around that. So, drive research impact into the real world. It's hard. It requires a lot from the ecosystem, from stakeholders. The model that we've created here is really unique, very disruptive, and it's really a great privilege and honor for me personally as well for the team, for me personally especially, I guess, to have an opportunity to kind of give back, to take the 15 years or so that I spent suffering in advanced diamond and trying to pass on all of the mistakes that I made along the way to these great groups of people that we have coming through our program. Hopefully you see a larger picture here. The world of energy is fundamentally changed, and as a consequence, the program has to do things at a higher level than just nurturing startups and entrepreneurs. We have to connect with that ecosystem, and that ecosystem needs to connect with us in order to solve those problems. The new energy crisis really is climate, and none of the models predict a solution to that. And it takes programs like this, in my opinion, to even give us a fighting chance of coming up with something truly impactful, truly disruptive, that's going to address these important issues. And that's all I was planning to say. I would be happy to take questions. Thank you. Thank you again for coming tonight. And it's so good I can now see you. Great.
Please wait for one of our mic handlers to bring you a mic so that we can all hear the question. Questions?
Hi.
With the presentation you made about this.
Could you use a mic so we can all hear the question, please? Thank you.
With the market approach that your whole lecture has been about for Argonne, my question is it also a reflection of budgetary constraints and support by the federal government so that you really almost are forced into having more applicable results rather than being pure investigative research? So in other words, is this something almost forced upon you because of diminished funding from the federal government?
I can speak definitively that the driving force here isn't to drive more revenue to Argonne. Now, for the scientists that participate, the program needs to drive outcomes that are important to scientists. And if you talk to any scientists here at Argonne, what they care about is the resources they have to do research. So one of the outcomes of the collaboration, of the innovator working with the scientists, is we want them to do what most great scientific collaborations always do. They think of new stuff to do, and they write proposals, and they get awarded funding to do those things. But it's not the driver. The purpose of CRI is not to drive more revenue into Argonne, and it's not, I would say, directly reactionary to the issue. I would say that in order for Argonne to grow as a healthy institution, part of what we're trying to do is to foster entrepreneurial thinking in our scientists here at Argonne. And I didn't get a chance to do this tonight, but actually USHMA's directorate runs a program called Launchpad, for instance, and it's really kind of the internal version of CRI. It's a program meant to foster and encourage program development of our scientists. Now, that means usually that instead of doing pure basic research where there's kind of no interaction with industry, the growth of Argonne usually relies on a connectivity with the industry. So hopefully I've answered your question. It would be bad if we put the cart before the horse, if you will.
Over the last 5, over the last 10 years, has the support from the federal government for research and for Argonne and the other national labs, has there been a significant reduction, or is it the same, or is it more? What is the trend on the funding that you get?
The trend planet-wide is less money for basic research.
And roughly, what, I mean, how, 10% less, 2% less, 25% less?
I'm very hard pressed to give you
Actually,
an
perhaps
answer.
I can answer that.
Yeah, go
so
ahead.
over the last several years, our funding has been quite flat, but in the last year, it has increased. Now, understand that we are one of 17 Department of Energy labs, so these fundings are allocated for the lab complex as a whole. And in general, I would say that, and this is an answer to your previous question really, the mission of Argonne and of all of the Department of Energy labs is to make sure that the United States economy and energy security is protected going forward. And the way we look at that is a long-term approach to providing the new technologies, to creating the new science, so that as we create this new science, we can work with people like the CRI innovators, but also companies all across the country to take some of these technologies out to market. But our job is not to do that taking to market. Our job is to create the seed corn by which America's prosperity is ensured going forward.
Thanks for the excellent lecture. What's your view on the thing about this solar and wind being unreliable? Is the long-term solution more like fusion reactors, rather, the power of the sun, rather than this stuff? Is this an interim from like 50 years from now? Would we be using fusion for making, no fossil fuels, that kind of thing?
Well, we did have an innovator in our recent call for proposals propose antimatter as an energy source. Just thought I'd mention that. Fusion's been worked on for many, many years, and technologically, break-even point has not been achieved. Some of the work I did in Diamond was so-called first wall problem. So you create this very intense plasma. We were trying to use Diamond in order to contain it. And I can just tell you there's a lot of gotchas there. And that's despite the fact they've worked on that for 50 years. Unreliability of wind and solar, I'm not aware of anybody really worried about that in terms of global deployment right now. I mean, those technologies have not only got orders of magnitude more reliable, but they're also orders of magnitude less expensive than they were just a few years ago to deploy. The biggest concern that I hear about renewables is the fact that they don't supply steady state power. So a nuclear power plant, a coal plant, you can control that and control the output. You can't dial a nuclear power plant down very easily, by the way. Whereas, on a windy day, you get more energy out of a wind farm. Energy storage, one of the things that Argonne is really internationally known for, is one of the critical areas that is going on here at Argonne to solve some of those problems of providing grid-level storage to mitigate some of the variability of the energy generation. But the reliability is, in terms of a business perspective, the operating cost incurred by reliability issues, that's kind of all folded into the levelized cost of energy generation for those technologies. Again, those are very low. I mean, in some regions, a factor or two less than nuclear and coal. Yeah.
In one of your last slides, you introduced us to the folks up on the screen here, and you described them in terms of two cohorts.
Yeah.
Cohort 1, Cohort 2. Mm-hmm. So two questions. Can you explain cohorts for us in a little more detail?
Sure.
And when you talk about funding, is there funding, are each of these individuals looking for funding, or is there any concept of funding an entire cohort?
So let me start with cohorts. So we run a solicitation every year. So we have a call for proposals, and then we bring in a cohort of 4 to 6 innovators, and then the following year we do the same thing. We bring another 4 to 6 innovators in. The program's only 2.5 years old, so we've done that twice. That's what we mean by Cohort 1, Cohort 2. Cohort 3, we just took the call for proposals. We received 122 applications. So it's a yearly cycle. I didn't get a chance to describe this, but the program is supported by 2 sources, by the Department of Energy Advanced Manufacturing Office. So they provide a lot of the money that we're talking about to operate the program, as well as pay salaries for the innovators. The program is also supported by our Argonne National Lab. Very uniquely, Argonne is putting some of its royalty funds in to match what's coming from the Department of Energy. And again, that goes against some of the value proposition for Argonne, which is to inspire new basic research here at the lab. They are always looking for money. If you would like to give them money, I can connect you. That's one of the things we tell them. They asked us, well, when should I start talking to investors? And the best time to do that is when you don't need money, which is at the beginning of your 2-year cycle. You've got enough money, quote unquote, to go do your thing. But eventually, if they're going to survive, they've got to raise money. There's 2 basic sources of that, by the way. There's grants and proposals. There's the Small Business Innovative Research Program, SBIR. In ADT, my own startup, I brought in about $35 million over a period of 10 years from non-dilutive sources, meaning you don't have to give up a piece of the company in order to get the money. But they also need private investment. Big reason for that is you can't pay for business activities in your business with that grant stuff. The government wants to pay for the technical work, not a VP of product development to go engage industry, or to pay for patent costs, for instance. That's another big area. So
I
hopefully
think we have time for one more question.
Oh, could you talk about how you handle intellectual property between the companies coming in and your existing scientists?
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the things I didn't get to mention is that when our innovators come to Argonne, they're not becoming Argonne employees. So they are driving their own startup. They are principals in their own startup company. And the intellectual property that is created in the project for which they're the inventor, even though they're working at Argonne, the startup company that they're in gets rights to that IP. So it's really important to understand the $1 million in resources is not diluting the startup. Argonne's not taking a piece of the action, if you will. The intellectual property that's created goes to the startup. Now, if there's joint invention between the scientists and the innovator, things get more interesting. In general, the use of that IP to advance the business purposes of the startup is owned by the innovator and their startup company. Argonne would like to have the option to commercialize that technology in another field of use. Field of use is a term you'll hear in intellectual property. Okay. So the terms are basically aligned so that the engagement, so that if there's business value being created, which intellectual property is a very key business value that the startup's creating, it needs to go to the startup. And Argonne's not trying to get a licensing stream. That's not the thing. Now, Chad Husko, remember the lasers, the laser guy on silicon? So he was an Argonne employee. So he's an example, actually, of an Argonne technology that's participating in our program. You're eligible if you're an Argonne employee to apply the program, in which case, if it's an Argonne technology, then yeah, the Argonne's going to get a licensing stream out of that. We have to manage that very carefully for obvious reasons, right? We don't want to turn this into something that's for the business purpose of Argonne. To your gentleman's question, right? That's the cart driving the horse, and that's not the way we operate. That's not the way the program's designed. Hopefully, did I answer your question? Okay, great.
One last question here in front.
My question is, in order to get in the program, do you require to bring high fidelity prototype for your project?
A high what?
High fidelity prototyping or just a simulation?
You're not required, her question is, are you required to have a high fidelity prototype? Okay, high fidelity prototype. So that would be, okay, well, I've really got a working example of my concept just already done. So I'm capturing that right. So the answer is no. I mean, again, where we see our place in the process, truly it can be the moment of discovery practically. It can be a concept, it can be an idea. We're looking for a solid scientific foundation. That's part of our process, is to ask some of the scientists here at Argonne, okay, is this science fiction or is it based on something that might actually work? But you don't have to have a product yet. Now, interestingly enough, Argonne is not a great place to build prototype products. That's not its thing. There's an entity in downtown Chicago called MHub, which is essentially a newly created makerspace for manufacturing startup companies in the Chicago region. And we just announced an MOU. And our innovators have access to that facility that has all the toys you could possibly imagine to do rapid prototyping and making mock-ups of your product. And actually several of our innovators, particularly in Cohort 2, that's going to be a very valuable asset to them because, again, Argonne doesn't have that sort of capability. The great thing is Chicago's got that stuff. InnoHub's just one example. Answer your question? Great.
Join me in thanking John again, please.
My pleasure.
Thank you, John.